There's a record from 1962, a summary of testimony from the FDA's Bureau of Medicine. It describes a crisis. A handful of medical officers were responsible for evaluating dozens of new drug applications every month. Each application could run to thousands of pages. The reviewers were overwhelmed, often able to read only a fraction of the data provided. That crisis triggered Congress to act. They passed the Kefauver-Harris Amendment. They increased FDA staff. They thought they solved it. They didn't. What they actually created was a mechanism so perfectly designed that regulatory capture became invisible. By 2024, the FDA employs approximately 18,000 people. The pharmaceutical industry spends billions annually on lobbying and regulatory affairs. The FDA cannot function without a specific stream of industry money. The pharmaceutical companies cannot function without FDA approval. The two are economically fused. This is the Gilded Archives, where the capture of regulators looks identical across 150 years because the architecture is always the same. The records show a system established in 1906 when Theodore Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act to prevent fraudulent medicines. The original mandate was simple: prevent the sale of adulterated or misbranded products. The FDA had a clear mission. Then, in 1938, after an elixir of sulfanilamide poisoning killed over 100 people, Congress passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The FDA now required proof of safety before drugs entered the market. This sounds like empowerment. What it actually was, the beginning of the capture mechanism. The more authority you give a regulator, the more the regulated industry must invest in that regulator to maintain market access. Authority without independent capacity creates dependency. The gap between what the FDA is tasked to review and its independent resources to do so creates a void. That gap is where capture lives. By 1962, that gap had become a public scandal. Medical officers were struggling to evaluate 50 to 100 new drug applications annually, each containing thousands of pages of raw data. Congress responded by doubling staff and expanding requirements for drug efficacy. But doubling wasn't enough. The pharmaceutical industry was growing exponentially. Over the following decades, the volume of applications and the complexity of data increased far beyond the FDA's taxpayer-funded growth. The math became permanent. The industry would always grow faster than the regulator's independent budget. That gap is the mechanism. The architecture of capture has three layers. First, the application fee. In 1992, Congress established the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, PDUFA. PDUFA was meant to solve the funding gap. Pharmaceutical companies would pay a fee for each drug application to hire more reviewers and speed up approvals. This sounds rational. What it created was financial dependence. By 2024, user fees account for roughly 75% of the FDA's budget for the review of human drugs. The FDA's Drug Review Division cannot function at its current scale without pharmaceutical company money. The pharmaceutical companies cannot get drugs approved without the FDA's cooperation. The two are economically fused. One cannot slow down the other without jeopardizing the funding of the entire process. Second, the revolving door. The records show a pattern so consistent it appears systematic. An FDA official spends years reviewing drug applications or setting policy. They become experts in regulatory pathways. They understand exactly what the agency wants to see in a submission. Then, they move to a private pharmaceutical firm or a law firm representing the industry. The salary is often several times their government pay. They are now on the other side. They use their insider knowledge to navigate the system they just left. Studies of FDA medical reviewers show that a significant percentage eventually transition to the industry they once regulated. The personnel circulation is so high that the boundary between the regulator and the industry is blurred. They are often the same people at different stages of their careers. Third, the capture mechanism itself. A pharmaceutical company develops a drug. The company knows the FDA has limited resources for independent testing. The company knows the reviewers may have come from the industry or may eventually join it. The company submits an application designed to meet the specific requirements for rapid review. The FDA reviews the company's own summary data. The drug enters the market. If the drug later causes unexpected harm, the FDA may issue warnings or require withdrawal. The company may pay a fine or settle lawsuits. Often, these costs are a fraction of the total profit, generated during the years the drug was on the market. The system has been architected so that the risk of rapid approval is often outweighed by the immense financial benefit of early market entry. The data reveals the results of this pressure. In 1999, the FDA approved Vioxx, a painkiller made by Merck. While the data provided to the FDA showed potential risks, the drug was moved through this process and became a blockbuster. Vioxx was on the market for 5 years before being withdrawn in 2004. During that time, it was linked to tens of thousands of heart attacks and deaths. Merck eventually paid billions in settlements, but the drug had already generated billions in revenue. This wasn't just a failure of individuals, it was the mechanism operating as designed. The system prioritizes the review clock, the speed of approval mandated by the user fee agreements. Fast approvals are a metric of success for the agency's funding, even when they increase the risk to patients. The intellectual framework for this shift was influenced by economists like Henry Grabowski in the 1970s and 80s. Grabowski argued that the drug lag, the time it took for the FDA to approve new medicines, was costing lives by keeping beneficial drugs off the market. He suggested that the solution was to streamline and speed up the approval process. This argument sounded compassionate and was eventually adopted by Congress through the user fee model. What this shift did not fully account for was that speed and rigorous safety verification are often in conflict. Faster approval timelines mean less time for the detection of long-term side effects. The push for speed, largely championed by industry-funded research and lobbying, became the new standard. The second mechanism is the clinical trial structure. When a pharmaceutical company tests a drug, they fund and design the trials. They choose the contract research organizations that collect the data. They employ the statisticians who analyze the results. The FDA primarily reviews the data provided by the company. It does not typically conduct its own independent clinical trials to verify the findings. The trial is designed to answer specific questions that favor the drug's approval. It may exclude populations with complex health issues or measure surrogate markers rather than long-term health outcomes. The FDA sees the results of a trial designed for success and approves the drug. Between 2010 and 2020, FDA approval times for new drugs remained significantly faster than those of many other global regulators. The speed isn't necessarily because the science is better, it's because the system is optimized for throughput. The pharmaceutical companies have mastered the art of structuring data to satisfy the review clock. The system has adapted to its financial constraints. Fast approval is the expected outcome of the user-fee relationship. We are at stage 5 of the regulatory capture pattern. Stage 1 was the FDA's creation in 1906. Stage 2 was authority expansion in 1938. Stage 3 was the workload crisis of 1962. Stage 4 was the implementation of user fees in 1992. Stage 5, where we are now, is the total integration of the regulator's budget with the industry's fees. The pattern says what comes next. Stage 6 is a state of complete integration, where the distinction between the regulator's mission and the industry's needs becomes entirely theoretical. By 2030, the percentage of the drug review budget funded by industry fees is projected to remain at these historic highs. The industry doesn't just influence the FDA. The industry is the FDA's primary customer under the user fee model. Every time you take a prescription medication, you're engaging with this mechanism. You are prescribed a common medication, like a statin. The drug was approved by an FDA funded largely by the manufacturers of such drugs. The clinical trials were designed and paid for by the manufacturer. The drug may reduce your cholesterol by 30% or more, providing a clear benefit. It may also carry risks, such as a statistically significant increase in the risk of new-onset diabetes, which may not have been the primary focus of the initial approval trials. You receive the benefit and the risk. The pharmaceutical company receives the profit. The FDA receives the user fee to fund the next review. The system worked exactly as designed. The 3 paths forward require acknowledging the capture's completeness. First, accept the system. Recognize that the FDA's approval process is heavily influenced by the companies it regulates. The system will produce drugs quickly because speed is the mandate of its funding. This means access to new therapies is fast, but it also means the public acts as the Phase 4 trial, the real-world testing ground where long-term harms are finally discovered. Most people accept this trade-off for the sake of medical progress, often without realizing that the safety net is thinner than they believe. Second, resist through independent verification. This requires significant time and health literacy. It involves looking beyond official approval and seeking out independent meta-analyses and long-term data. This path is often only available to those with the resources to navigate complex medical literature and consult with specialists who are not solely reliant on industry-provided education. The capture of the regulatory system creates a divide between those who trust the seal of approval and those who have the means to verify it. Third, position by understanding the limitations of the data. When a new drug is released, understand that the safety and efficacy reported by the FDA is based on trials designed by the manufacturer to achieve approval. The trial may not represent your specific health profile or long-term risks. Understand that the FDA is monitoring the review clock as much as the data. Recognizing the incentive structure of the agency allows you to approach new medications with appropriate caution. This is pattern recognition. The The system has been architected to prioritize the approval of products, not the independent verification of their long-term impact. The deeper protection lies in what history shows always survives regulatory capture: skepticism of official assurances and the preservation of independent inquiry. When the regulatory system is financially dependent on the industry it oversees, the burden of safety shifts from the regulator to the individual. In the past, when regulators were slow to acknowledge the dangers of certain industrial chemicals or consumer products, those who relied on independent evidence fared better. Today, as pharmaceutical regulation is integrated with industry funding, those who understand the trial structures and the funding mechanisms of the FDA make more informed decisions. Independent health literacy is the only resilient response to a captured system. The pattern says what comes next. As user fees continue to dominate the budget, the revolving door will become even more common. The approval process will likely become even faster. Harm detection will continue to rely on reports filed after the drug is already being used by millions. Occasionally, a major safety crisis will capture public attention, leading to calls for reform and new legislation. But unless the underlying financial dependency is removed, the capture mechanism will simply adapt. The regulator remains financially dependent on the regulated. Until that incentive changes, every fix simply creates a more sophisticated version of the same integration. The thing that was built, the current FDA funding model, was designed to be efficient for the industry. It was not designed to be a truly independent check on power. The system is stable as long as the drugs it approves provide enough benefit to outweigh the harms that eventually emerge. But the legitimacy of the system relies on the public's trust that the regulator is an independent arbiter. As that trust erodes, the system becomes more fragile. The records show this pattern in every captured regulatory sector. The capture creates a period of apparent efficiency and profit, followed by a crisis that reveals the hidden costs. The current pharmaceutical regulatory model is a high-speed version of this historical cycle. You take a pill. It was approved by an agency funded by the company that made the pill. The pill provides a benefit, but it also carries a cost-benefit ratio calculated by a captured system. You are part of the calculation. The pharmaceutical company realizes the profit. The FDA realizes the funding. You experience the outcome. The system is functioning exactly as it was architected to function. If this pattern revealed something you'd never seen before, subscribe to the Gilded Archives. History's records reveal how regulatory systems are captured. The FDA isn't unique. It's an iteration of a pattern that repeats across the landscape of modern governance. Understanding it allows you to see the mechanism behind the next approval, the next mandate, and the next agency that claims to protect you while being funded by the very thing it regulates. The records are specific. The outcomes are predictable. We're just watching it unfold.